Thank you for joining us for another edition of Park Talk. I'm here today with Trevor Brooks, who's a PhD student at UT studying.
Yeah, I'm studying urban climatology with an emphasis on extreme urban heat and climate adaptation.
So for those of us who are not PhD students, and like, can you break that down for me? Like, what do you do? Like, what's the study?
Yeah. So this particular study is, there's something called the urban heat island effect. And that's this phenomenon where urban centers are hotter than their surrounding rural counterparts. And that's because there's an abundance of concrete and asphalt that we need to have our urban infrastructure, right? Now, this concrete and asphalt will actually hold on to the heat better than green space. And so what ends up happening is that during the night, all the grass will release, all the green space will release the heat, whereas the concrete and stuff will hold on to it, making the city hotter throughout the day and also throughout the night.
Wow.
And so obviously in cities like Austin, it's really hot. Extreme heat is the leading weather-related fatality, even beating out things like hurricanes, tornadoes, etc.
Really?
Yes, yeah, and it's very, very alarming. But it's kind of it's a kind of hidden killer, right? People don't necessarily think of extreme heat as something that they have to watch out for.
Right. Especially, I grew up in South Texas, and it's hot. I mean, it's just hot, and you hear there will be, the heat index is really high, or there's like a heat warning or a heat wave, stay inside. And it's really hard to do that when it's like sunny and beautiful outside. You can go to the pool. You don't think of people dying. So is it people just getting overheated or being dehydrated? Like what leads to that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. So one of the major things is actually indoor temperature. Will actually cause people to become really heat stressed, and it's especially happens in your lower socioeconomic populations that have less. Their buildings tend to be older and less efficiently designed to handle the heat, and so they can't necessarily afford things like AC to help cool themselves down. And so what ends up happening is they just cook inside their house, and especially if it's really hot at night, they don't get to have that relief of the cooling to help them recover at night. And so it's kind of this overloading of heat stress that kind of helps accumulate. But the other kind of more sensitive populations are those like outdoor workers who obviously are doing high strenuous tasks outside, and that tends to have an overload of heat stress on their bodies, and they also tend to be people that are really sensitive as well.
Right, and I would assume that people that work outside, construction workers, road workers, probably also might fall into that lower socioeconomic class. So there really is no break. I would assume a majority of the time.
Correct. Yes.
That's wild. You don't think, especially growing up in South Texas, you just don't think of heat being, I know it's hot, right. It's very hot. It's very uncomfortable, especially when you have multiple days over 100 degrees. And what you're saying is that people in the city that are in these maybe lower income housing or old buildings, and they still can't afford AC, they're cooking in their homes.
Yes. Yeah.
It's so sad.
Yeah. And there's a myriad of other sensitive populations that we look at.
Sure.
For example, children,
Sure.
They tend to actually have a higher metabolic rate. And so that actually causes them to run a little bit hotter. And then, children also tend to not be able to vouch for themselves. Right. And so they might not be able to express, hey, what's happening to me? I'm feeling really hot. That's why, see kids that get like locked in cars, right? They tend to overheat. Even kids that are participating in like high school sports, right? Or just, rec sports or things like that. I mean, I was a football player, and I remember putting on the pads and, everything like that, and then taking them off, and it, you instantly felt yourself cool down a couple degrees. But as soon as you take the pads off, other sensitive populations would be like people with mental health issues.
Sure.
Tends to be people that I already said lower socioeconomic. I could go on and on.
Yeah. So you're trying to solve this problem,
more or less.
Part of a team trying to solve this.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. What's your? I know you have a goal of a certain study that you're doing. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So my lab is at the Jackson School of Geosciences at UT Austin. We are specifically part of something called the UT City Climate Collab, which is this first in the world that we know relationship between the city of Austin, UT, and then community members, where it's basically allows us to better work with each other. And so I've been able to work with Mark Couder, for example, who works at the city of Austin. He's amazing. He kind of helps run a lot of the sustainability and resilience efforts in Austin, as well as Zach Balmer as well. And I'm my lab specifically, as I said, the Texas lab, we are an extreme weather focused lab. So we have a couple of different branches, one being extreme heat, one being extreme precipitation, the other being hurricanes. And we've done a bunch of different work, but all kind of oriented towards urban resilience and sustainability.
How many tornadoes have you chased?
me none.
Okay.
But I know some people that have done some of that really cool stuff. I saw that movie Twisters, or the second Twisters movie the other day, and I was like, wow, you guys actually do really cool stuff. Wow,
yeah,
that's awesome.
So cool.
Unfortunately, I'm more of a computer
guy.
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, that's probably safer. But the weather just is so incredible. And we have no control over it. So, but what we do have control over is something that you're doing. So you're talking about ways to cool a city down. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So the cities have really tended to emphasize two main strategies in how they're trying to cool down the city. The first one being increasing the amount of green space, right? So things like trees, grasses, et cetera, they help cool down the city by providing shade, evapotranspiration, et cetera. And that's really great, and cities should be investing in that, but it doesn't work everywhere all the time, right? Especially cities like Phoenix that have they don't necessarily have abundant amount of water, and so you can't plant a whole bunch of trees and then increase their water stress. So then the other option tends to be an investment in something called gray infrastructure, and these are things like cool roofs, cool roads. And these are umbrella terms for a myriad of different strategies. But specifically what we're looking at is something called reflective pavement. Okay. And so the city of Austin has laid down about 6.4 lane miles of reflective pavement down in a neighborhood called the Reserves at McKinney Falls, which is really close to where we are right now.
Yeah.
And basically how this pavement works is it tries to increase the reflectivity of the road. And so how, explaining the urban heat island, the pavements will absorb the solar radiation and hold on to it. And so the idea behind this is it's just reflecting that radiation out at a higher rate, so it's not kind of getting into the system in the first place to then readmit it and keep the city hotter.
Nice. It's like it's almost like a thermos, right? Like it's just like the heat's coming in, it's just being held and not really cooling off unless you give it a reason to. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's how I was thinking about it. So is it kind of like, and this might be a really dumb question, but is it kind of like back in the day when ladies would like tan with the reflective thing, because it's like reflecting the sun back up?
Yeah, and so one of the questions that we're trying to figure out with this stuff is, there's something called mean radiant temperature, which that's just the amount of solar radiation that's hitting you from different angles, right? So looking around, this room, right?
Sure.
If we had an imaginary sun, I'd be getting hit by light reflecting off of here, from the ground, from the doors over there,
sure,
et cetera. And so that all has a really big effect on how I actually feel in terms of my thermal comfort, right? And so there's different metrics that we can look at. We can look at air temperature, we can look at mean radiant temperature, or we can look at surface temperature, which surface temperature is just the actual temperature of the surface that we're looking at. So like if you touch like a hot pan or something like that and you pull your hand away, it's because the surface temperature is really hot. And all three of those have different kind of metrics of how we actually feel. And mean radiant temperature is something that we're looking at right now, because if the mean radiant temperature increases because you're getting hit by more solar radiation from the bottom, you might actually feel hotter. So that's something that we're kind of teasing out as part of this study.
Right. That makes sense. And so your whole goal in this is, like we were talking earlier before we started, is that you can take the surface temperature, you can take the air temperature, you can take all of these things, but it doesn't really matter if people don't feel cooler. You wouldn't spend the money, I guess, to repave an entire city if it doesn't really, if the perception of the person doesn't match up to, I guess, the goal of what you're trying to to solve.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. As these cities are growing and expanding and trying to adapt to climate change, we really have to not only think about just metrics in terms of numbers, but we have to design it for people, because people are are who going to live there, and
Right.
people whose lives are going to be affected. For example, there's a story that I've learned working with some community members in Dove Springs, where there's a neighborhood that predominantly made up of people that ride the bus, and the closest bus stop's about 2 miles away, and the road to get to the bus stop, no trees or anything, and so you have people walking 2 miles with just sun bearing down on them, and you have mothers passing out on the side of the road trying to carry groceries.
Oh no.
Right. And so if we're trying to design cities without a people oriented focus, we're going to run into issues like this in the future. And even if we're trying to do something good, right, if it's not oriented around people, you might have negative externalities that can actually negatively affect people's lives, even if the intention is good.
Sure. And so that's what you're trying to prove, is that this is worth it.
Right. Correct. Yeah. We're trying to make sure that this is a worthy investment that the city can, hopefully use to cool down the city and make life easier for people.
I love that. So you're obviously a super smart guy. What was your undergrad in?
So I did a double major in environmental science and political science at a very small liberal arts university called Bridgewater College. Actually, my undergrad studies was actually more focused on things like conservation, and I always wanted to actually be a zookeeper. That's what I thought I was going to get into. But I had the fortunate opportunity of doing an REU, which is a research experience for undergrads at UT, and that's where I met my advisor and got into all this kind of heat-oriented work.
So your passion, everything that we go to school changes 100 times, but you want what was your passion about being a zookeeper, like zoology?
Yeah. So going all the way back to when I was a kid, my grandfather was my primary babysitter. And I, being a kid, wanted to watch like Cartoon Network and SpongeBob and all this kind of stuff, and he said, nope, you have to watch at least like an hour of Animal Planet before you could watch anything else. And so actually grew up watching a lot of like Steve Irwin and the Crocodile Hunter, and just seeing all of these cool animals, and realizing that they have like intrinsic value, and they deserve to exist just for the sake of existing, right? And wanting to preserve the natural ecosystems was actually what got me into environmental science and wanting to do that in the first place. And then as I kind of grew a little bit, I also realized, hey, people matter too. And getting into kind of political science and everything like that, I realized that, really environmentalism and conservation has always been so intrinsically connected to, your political kind of atmosphere, right?
Oh, yes.
Like, and that's something that, as a kid, you don't necessarily appreciate. And then you get a little bit older and you're like, wow, you really can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
And so really trying to orient ourselves to a place where the two work in harmony, rather than how it's often been kind of butting heads.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier, is that if the experience of the people isn't good, even with the best of intention to solve a problem, if the experience isn't good, it's not worth doing. Right. You're not really helping anyone. So, which leads me to ask you what year you plan to run for president.
I will say the presidency is a thankless job.
Fair enough.
But maybe one day.
Okay.
Maybe one day.
There's many steps between your PhD and the presidency.
Yeah.
Where do you? So this is a study that you're doing right now. Obviously, it's not your full-time job. What are your goals when you get out of school?
So I'm a second year, so I haven't given it too much thought yet.
Okay.
But I've always wanted to go and work in the government in some way, shape, or form. I like academia, but it turns, I've seen some things that have kind of turned me off a little bit. And anywhere you go, you're going to have pros and cons, right? But I really just feel like I could make the most change in the government rather than from an academic perspective. And I've never been one that's been interested for research just for research's sake. And so I've always wanted my research to have an actual impact on people's lives, to make the world a better place. And so that's why hopefully getting into the government and hopefully getting, high up in an agency or a national lab or something like that, I can kind of help direct the science to where, I think it needs to go.
I love that. Do you come from a family of scientists?
No. I'm the first. I'm the first person in my family that's ever gotten a degree higher than a bachelor's, to my knowledge.
Okay.
All of my grandparents kind of died youngish, and so, and my mom works as a reauthorization agent for a company called Dynasplint. And then my dad works for the government as a case analyst. He does background checks and stuff like that. Yeah.
Cool. So you've kind of that civil service though. That's kind of bred into you, I guess. Siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother. He goes to Millersville University.
Okay.
He's actually a senior year. Time flies. And he's studying computer science. He's way smarter than me. Can't say enough good things about him.
Your parents must be super proud. That's so exciting. It's got to be. My husband and I don't have children, but to just know that your kids, I would assume, are like going off and doing incredible things. Like, it's got to be the best feeling in the world. So you're deep in your studies. Do you get to go home often?
I try. Family is really important to me.
Okay.
And my girlfriend's also over on the East Coast. I'm from Maryland, and so it's kind of a far trip, and so I go as much as I can. But obviously it's never enough, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I will be going in October, I think, for a wedding, and so I'll get to see everybody and have some nice family time.
What part of Maryland?
Annapolis.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
My husband's from Columbia.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and
wow.
So I went to visit him, and I'd never been to the East Coast. I grew up in South Texas.
Okay.
As you know, Texas is, I mean, you don't really, you're here. It's not like, I remember when I went to visit him, we went to many different states and went to DC, but we did end up in Annapolis for a little while, and it's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful area. That's amazing. So tell me about this study, and you're asking for volunteers, and like talk me through what this whole project is that you're doing.
Yeah, so other cities have laid down reflective pavement. I've already said, City of Austin's laid down 6.4 lane miles. Other cities, including City of Phoenix, the City of San Antonio, City of LA, and I think the first ever pilot study was actually done in Athens, Greece.
Okay.
They've all laid down this stuff and tried to evaluate it using, various sensors, air temperature sensors, surface temperature sensors, even mean radiant temperatures. It's actually kind of cool. They have something called a meteorology card. Sorry.
Okay.
And that measures the mean radiant temperature. And so, if I'm walking around, how much solar radiation is actually hitting me. And so they've all done that, which is really cool and has given some results that have been kind of complicated. They haven't necessarily been able to tease out exactly what the effects are, which is why we're also doing a study. And kind of our addition to this is a social science study. And, as I kind of talked about, making sure that people actually can sense a difference. Because it's one thing for the air temperature sensors to say there's a 5-degree difference. It's another thing for us to say, oh, I actually feel warmer on traditional pavement versus reflective pavement, or vice versa, right? And so basically what we're asking is for volunteers to come out on next Saturday, which is the 28th, to the site, which is again right next to Hillcrest Elementary School, at the reserves of McKinney Falls neighborhood. And you're gonna get basically all we're asking is to walk on the reflective pavement and walk on the traditional pavement, and we're gonna ask some questions about whether or not they actually feel a difference. And so we'll assign them to different groups and have them walk on each site, and then it's a short little questionnaire that they'll have to answer. And participants will receive some compensation, about $20. Also, there'll be free food and free kind of ice cream and things like that to try to help cool people down in the medium time. And so, and these sorts of things are really hard to kind of get a good amount of participants for, and which is a shame because the amount of participants helps increase the power of the study, right?
Sure.
And so, we're really looking to get the most amount of people out there as possible to increase the significance of our study, so we can go to the city and say, look, we know that this is something that works or doesn't work, and we have all of this evidence as to why, and this is how people actually feel about it. And so
yeah, That's amazing. So Easton Park, we need you to volunteer for this. How do people volunteer?
Yeah, and so we have a flyer that has a QR code that
Okay.
we can pass on to you guys, and I don't know if you guys can attach that to the episode or something like that. Wonderful. We have that and a link to a form. And if you just fill out the form, we'll have your email and we'll communicate with you more of the specifics of where to go.
Amazing. So Easton Park is a very very active community. A lot of walking, a lot of walking dogs, a lot of running, and I do think that this community could get really passionate about this, especially if you guys determine that it works. I think that a lot of people here in this specific neighborhood, which is we're 2 minutes from where you're going to do the study, like we're right here, would really be passionate, and it would be so beneficial to so many people here. And it's a pretty active community, so we call out to all you people in Easton Park to spend some time next Saturday with Trevor out at the reserve at McKinney Falls.
Reserves at McKinney Falls. Yeah.
How long do you think it will take?
Should only take about an hour and a half at the most.
Everyone has an hour and a half on a Saturday. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Park Talk. We will see you next time.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name's Trevor Brooks. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Texas at Austin, specifically the Jackson School of Geosciences. Now, have you ever been walking around Austin and noticed it's a little bit hot outside? Well, we're offering you a way to help us walk the way to cool. So on September 28th, it's a Saturday, at 11 a.m., we're going to be having an event at the Reserves at McKinney Falls neighborhood, which is right next to Hillcrest Elementary School. And all we're asking you to do is just walk around a neighborhood, specifically on Reflective Pavement. Reflective Pavement is a novel infrastructure that the city has laid down to try to cool down the city. And so, just come out. It should only take about an hour and a half. You'll get free refreshments. You'll get about $20 for helping us out and participating. Families are welcome, and you can do the walk together, but you have to be 18 or older to actually have us collect the data. You can also bring your dog. We obviously won't be collecting data from the dog. And yeah, please come out. This is an important opportunity that will have a direct impact in how the city invests in climate adaptation infrastructure in the future. Thank you so much, and can't wait to see you there.